Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone listening today, I want to talk about a man. Not just any man, but a man who dreamed differently, thought differently, and worked differently. A man who changed the world, not once, but again and again. His name was Steve Jobs. Now, many of you may know him as the co-founder of Apple. You may know him as the man behind the iPhone or the iPad or the MacBook. But the truth is, Steve Jobs was more than a businessman. He was a visionary, a fighter, a dreamer, and a creator. His story is not just about success. It is about pain, passion, purpose, and pushing limits. And if you listen closely, maybe his story can help you unlock your own. Let's begin where all great stories begin, the beginning. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. He was the child of a young couple who weren't ready to raise him. So, he was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple who gave him a stable home. They weren't rich. His father was a machinist who taught Steve how to take things apart and put them back together. His mother cared for the home and supported Steve's curiosity. From an early age, Steve was different. He didn't just play with toys. He asked how they worked. He liked building things. He liked puzzles. He liked challenges. School didn't always understand him. He got bored easily. But inside his mind, something was always clicking, always turning. As a teenager, he met another young man named Steve Wozniak. They both loved electronics. They both loved innovation. And they both wanted to build something great. This friendship would become one of the most important partnerships in tech history. Steve went on to attend Reed College, but he dropped out after 6 months. Why? Because he didn't want his parents' money to go to waste. But even after dropping out, he continued attending classes that interested him, especially one on calligraphy. Yes, calligraphy. The art of beautiful writing. Years later, he would use this knowledge to bring beautiful fonts to the Macintosh. That shows us that sometimes the most random things we learn become useful in amazing ways. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started a company in the garage of Steve's parents' house. They called it Apple. With very little money and just a big dream, they built their first computer, the Apple I. It wasn't fancy. But it worked. And it showed people that maybe computers didn't need to be giant machines for scientists. Maybe they could be for everyone. Then came the Apple II, which was a massive success. For the first time, ordinary people, schools, homes, small businesses could own a personal computer. Apple became a growing company, and Steve Jobs was its heart. In 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh, a beautiful, friendly computer with a graphical interface and a mouse. It looked different. It felt different. It was designed for people, not just programmers. It was a vision come to life. But then, things changed. Even though Steve was the founder, even though he was the dreamer behind the company, he was still very young. He had big ideas, but not everyone in the company agreed with how he managed things. The company board eventually decided that Steve Jobs had to leave. Yes. Steve Jobs was fired from the company he created. Can you imagine that? You build something from scratch, you pour your heart and soul into it, and then you're told to leave? For many people, that would have been the end. But for Steve, it was just the beginning of something new. In the years after Apple, Steve didn't give up. He started a new company called Next, building computers for education and business. They were powerful, smart, and ahead of their time. At the same time, he bought a small animation company from George Lucas. That company was called Pixar. Steve Jobs invested his own money and energy into it. And together, with amazing artists and creators, they made Toy Story, the first ever computer-animated film. Toy Story wasn't just a hit, it was history. It changed the world of animation forever. And Pixar went on to make more hits, Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Up, and many others. Steve Jobs became a legend in two industries, technology and entertainment. But life had another surprise. In 1997, Apple was struggling. The company was near bankruptcy. Products weren't selling. Confidence was low. So Apple did something many thought was impossible. They brought Steve Jobs back. And when he returned, he brought the fire. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was on the edge of collapse. Sales were down. Products were confusing. The company had lost its way. But Steve didn't come back to play safe. He came back to rebuild, reinvent, and reignite the fire. One of the first things he did was cut the product line. Apple had too many products, and people were confused. Steve said, let's make for great products, one for consumers, one for professionals, one for desktops, and one for laptops. That's it. Focus. Simplicity. Clarity. Then he introduced something fresh, the iMac. It was colorful. It was friendly. It was all in one. It had curves. It had personality. It didn't look like a computer. It looked like the future. And people loved it. The iMac wasn't just a hit, it saved Apple. But Steve didn't stop there. In 2001, Steve introduced the iPod, a tiny device that let you carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. At that time, most people were using CDs or big players. The iPod changed how people listened to music forever. But he didn't stop there either. He saw the music industry was broken. People were pirating songs. Artists weren't getting paid. So he launched the iTunes Store. It allowed people to buy music legally, one song at a time, for 99 cents. It was easy, clean, and legal. And it worked. Apple became not just a tech company but a music company too. Then came 2007, the year everything changed again. At a keynote event, Steve Jobs walked on stage and said, "Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products, a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device." He repeated that sentence. The audience was silent. Then he said, "These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it the iPhone." Boom. The world would never be the same again. The iPhone combined everything: phone, music, camera, internet, apps, all in one beautiful, touchscreen device. People had never seen anything like it. It was magical. It was futuristic. And it worked. The iPhone became the most successful product in history. It made Apple the most valuable company in the world. It changed how we live, how we work, how we talk, and how we think. But even that wasn't enough. In 2010, Steve introduced the iPad. Critics laughed. They said it was just a big iPhone. But Steve knew what he was doing. He saw a new way for people to read, watch, browse, and play. Millions of people bought it. And by now, Apple was not just a company, it was a revolution. It had changed the computer industry, the music industry, the phone industry, the movie industry, the software industry, and even retail with Apple stores. All of this, led by one man who had once been fired, once doubted, once defeated. But there was something else going on behind the scenes. In 2003, Steve Jobs was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. At first, he didn't want surgery. He tried alternative treatments. But eventually, he had surgery and later a liver transplant. He fought. He kept working. He kept dreaming. Even while battling for his life, he was leading Apple, making decisions, launching products, and giving presentations that inspired the world. But slowly, the illness took a toll on his body. He became thinner. He looked tired. Yet, he showed up again and again because he believed in what he was building. In August 2011, Steve resigned as CEO of Apple. He said, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know." Unfortunately, that day has come. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The world mourned. Not just the tech world. Not just Apple fans. Everyone. Because Steve Jobs had become a symbol of innovation, of design, of believing in yourself even when others don't. When Steve Jobs died, millions of people around the world posted messages online. World leaders, business owners, students, artists, and fans shared their sadness. They talked about how his work had changed their lives. People were holding up their iPhones and saying, "Thank you, Steve." But the question is, why did Steve Jobs matter so much? Yes, he created amazing products. Yes, he helped build one of the most powerful companies in the world. But that wasn't all. He represented something bigger. The idea that one person with passion, focus, and courage could change everything. Steve Jobs believed in dreams. But more importantly, he believed in making dreams real. He wasn't just a thinker. He was a do. He took bold steps. He took risks. He failed and came back stronger. He once said, "I'm convinced that about half of what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is pure perseverance." That's powerful. Not money. Not education. Not connections. Perseverance. The ability to keep going. Another important lesson Steve taught us was about focus. He often said, innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. He didn't believe in doing everything. He believed in doing a few things very well. He believed in simplicity. In clarity. In elegance. He cared deeply about design, not just how things looked, but how they worked. He said, design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. He wanted people to feel good when they used his products. He wanted technology to feel human. Steve Jobs also believed in the power of teams. He once said, "Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people." He was demanding, yes, but he wanted the best. He pushed people to go beyond their limits. Many who worked with him said it was the hardest job they ever had, but also the most meaningful. And of course, one of his most famous ideas was about connecting the dots. In his 2005 Stanford commencement speech, perhaps the most famous speech of his life, he said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backward." He reminded us that sometimes life doesn't make sense when we're going through it. But later, we see how everything fits together. His speech had 3 key stories. About dropping out of college and learning calligraphy. About being fired from Apple and starting Pixar and Next. About being diagnosed with cancer and understanding what really matters. He said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." Steve Jobs taught us to think different. He told us to stay curious. He told us to stay bold. He told us to stay true to our hearts. And he told us to stay hungry and foolish. That line, "Stay hungry, stay foolish," is now world famous. It means, never settle. Always be curious. Never think you've arrived. Always be learning. Always be exploring. So what can we take from his life? Maybe you're not a tech expert. Maybe you're not a business person. Maybe you don't want to build the next Apple. That's okay. Because Steve Jobs' story is not just about building technology. It's about building a life you believe in. Maybe you want to be a teacher, or an artist, or a writer, or a scientist, or a doctor. The lesson is the same. Love what you do. Believe in your work. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to be different. And always keep learning, growing, and building. Steve's life also reminds us of time. He said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." That's one of the most important things to remember. Life is short. Time is fast. We don't know how long we have. So we must live fully, honestly, and bravely. It's easy to think of Steve Jobs as a larger-than-life figure, a genius, an inventor, a billionaire. But behind the scenes, Jobs was also a deeply philosophical thinker. He had a unique view of the world and a sense of purpose that transcended his professional achievements. He didn't just want to create products, he wanted to make a lasting impact on humanity. Jobs once said, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do." This was the guiding principle behind his career. He didn't settle for mediocrity, and he didn't believe in following trends. Instead, he sought to set the trends, to push the boundaries of what was possible, and to challenge the conventional wisdom. He believed that doing great work meant doing work that was meaningful, work that would change the world for the better. One of the most significant aspects of Steve Jobs' leadership was his ability to inspire those around him. He didn't just want employees, he wanted people who shared his vision, his passion, and his commitment to excellence. He surrounded himself with talented, creative individuals who were willing to challenge themselves and each other. Jobs created an environment where innovation thrived, where people were encouraged to think differently and take risks. Apple became a place where brilliant minds came together to create groundbreaking products. But Steve Jobs was not just a visionary leader, he was also an incredibly demanding one. He had a reputation for being tough, and he often pushed people to their limits. He could be harsh, and he had little patience for mediocrity. He demanded the best from everyone around him, and he was known to have little tolerance for anything less. But his exacting standards produced extraordinary results. Apple's products were the epitome of excellence, and the company became synonymous with innovation, quality, and design. In many ways, Jobs' leadership style can be described as both inspiring and intimidating. He knew how to motivate people, but he also knew how to drive them hard. He was unapologetic in his pursuit of perfection. He didn't settle for anything less than the best, and he expected the same from everyone who worked for him. Some people found this challenging, but many others found it invigorating. Jobs created a culture where failure was not an option. If you were part of Apple, you were part of something extraordinary. And that sense of belonging and purpose motivated people to give their best.